Glad you're here.
It's probably conspiracy. I don't know. Go down the chute.
Okay. So we've discussed thus far all sorts of different aspects of Shmita, and what we had made up to discuss for this year is the topic of the home garden during Shmita. Now, the home garden actually happens to be an extremely fun topic when it comes to Shmita, because a lot of the Shmita halachos actually seem to get somewhat lost in modern day Shmita, because the whole reason why we have Otzar Bezdin or these types of things, it's not practical to go pick your produce on a farm or something like that. But we lose a lot of the agricultural aspects, which most of the halachos of Shmita are agricultural. We lose them when it comes to Shmita. So the one opportunity that most of us have for the agricultural aspect of Shmita is the home garden. So the home garden really gets broken down into 2 or 3 types of categories. We'll say 3 categories, but the 3 categories are as follows. There's plants that give some sort of produce, be it trees, be it vegetable plants, and we'll subdivide those momentarily. And then there are plants that are there for fragrance, that you smell them. They smell very nice. Sometimes people plant bedafka, certain types of flowers or certain types of herbs in their gardens, not because they intend to eat them per se, but it smells very nice. And I like this. There's also a reason why people plant things. And, when you go to a gardening store, they even have plants. They tell you that they bring lots of butterflies to your garden. So a lot of people like that. It brings kind of flowers in motion to your garden. But there's all sorts of different types of plants. So another category that we're going to mention on its own are plants that give fragrance to your garden. And then the last part are plants that don't really give anything other than you plant them for landscaping purposes. Whether it's grass because you want to have a nice lawn, or whether it's all sorts of other flowers that don't have any particular smell, but it adds a splash of color, it adds a splash of life to your gardens. Now the catch is that this is also the one area where perhaps, maybe we should have started with it actually for this reason, that starts before the onset of the actual Shmita. Shmita begins, Bez Hashem, this coming Rosh Hashanah, 5775, and continues to the following Rosh Hashanah, Tavshin Ayin Vav. Some of the gardening has to stop as soon as less than a week from now, on the 16th of Av. Now what's the cheshbon in that? Why does it work that way? Why stop early? The truth of the matter is there is a biblical or rabbinic concept, depending on how you learn the sugis, when Shmita was biblical at least, of something called Tosefes Shmita, that we add on to Shmita. We're all familiar with Tosefes Shabbos, Tosefes Yom Tov, that on Erev Shabbos, we like to accept Shabbos earlier. Why? Because it's actually a Shiur. Yom Kippur, the same thing. There's a Tosefes Inui on Yom Kippur. Tosefes Inui doesn't necessarily mean the actual Kedusha Siyam. Maybe it does mean that. That's a discussion in Gemara. But it means that the Inuyim you accept before the fast of Yom Kippur. So during Shmita, it's Bachar, Shulakatz, Tishbais, so there's all sorts of drushes. But the idea is that already before Shmita, you add on to Shmita. But that's not what we're doing now when we stop on the Tes Zayin of planting. What can't we plant? We can't plant fruit trees. And why can't we plant fruit trees? Because like this, a fruit tree, we all know, aside from Shmita, and aside from Trumas and Meisers, it has another category, another set of halachos that are very important. What's that set of halachos? Arla and Neter Ravai. That the first 3 years, the fruit are forbidden. The 4th year, they're permissible. They have to be eaten in Yerushalayim. If you live in Beit Shemesh and it's too encompassing, so you don't have to bring it to Yerushalayim, we do what's called Chilul Revai, Pidyon Revai, where you're paid, so to speak, the Revai onto money, and then theoretically the money is supposed to be used in Yerushalayim. Nowadays it's a little more complicated. But theoretically, you go to Yerushalayim and then you buy some sort of food item in Yerushalayim, you eat the food item, and it's as if you ate the fruit in Yerushalayim, and those original fruit you can eat at your home in Beit Shemesh. Now, how does this work? There's years that are counted for the Orla. How do we decide? It's good Beis Chodesh, right? It's like a kid, like a person, like us. We have a birthday. Everybody has a birthday their own time of year, whatever it might be. So for somebody it's an Adar, another person it's a Nisan, another person it's an Av. Everybody has their own birthday, and that's when they turn 1 year old, 2 years old, 3 years old. That's when they have their bar mitzvah, bas mitzvah, whatever it is, and that's how we're minor. That's how we count the years. Is that how it works? No, it's not how it works for trees. The way it works for most trees, aside from perhaps citrus trees, but that's a different Lashon, the way it works is that they have that at the Rosh Chodesh Elul is when we start counting the new year for that tree. Now, in order for it to be considered a year old, it has to have been considered 1 month growing in the ground. And Chazal make another hashara, make another equation. They say that it takes 2 weeks, 14 days, for a plant to root itself strongly in the ground, a tree to root itself strongly in the ground. So what do you have? You have a month and 14 days. So we need from Tezayin of 14 days, right? The 16th of Av, another 14 days. That's the 30th. Rosh Chodesh Elul. We start now. We get to Rosh Chodesh Elul. Rosh Chodesh Elul was planted we need a month from Rosh Chodesh Elul to Rosh Chodesh Rosh Hashanah till Rosh Hashanah, and you have the 14 days before, and now you have that month beforehand. So we count its year already from before Tafshin Ayin Hey, before this forthcoming Rosh Hashanah, and therefore we have the first year. What would happen if we didn't have that first year? Chazal will word it like this. If the year starts in Shmita, it's true, I didn't do any malacha during Shmita, I planted it before Shmita. And I didn't plant it for Shmita because I'm not going to be able to eat the fruit during Shmita. But what does it look like? Now, in 5 years from now, 10 years, not 5 years from now, 3 years from now, and 4 years from now, when I make my Chilul Revai, so somebody's going to say, wait a second, 4 years from now, your first year was Shmita, you planted during Shmita. That's what it's going to look like. So because Chazal didn't want it to appear as if we planted during Shmita, Chazal made an enactment, and they said that we have to plant it sufficiently before that when Shmita comes around, it's already its second year, so that it should be clear as day that it wasn't planted during Shmita year to all, even though that's only going to be something that has its ramifications in 4 years.
So the age of a sapling before it's put in the ground doesn't matter?
Okay, now it could matter. When does it matter? Now there's actually a Shiloh, which is really again not to Rabbi and Arla much more, and this is one of the differences between quote unquote kashrut regular and kashrut mahadrin when it comes to produce from trees, and that's as follows. There's something they refer to it as dushnati, and like this, most saplings you don't put an apple seed in the ground, no Johnny apple seeds around anymore. It's not just going around and dropping apple seeds and all of a sudden poof comes one day there's an apple orchard there, right? Or if you want to make it a little bit more religious, no Chayni Hamagils with their falling asleep for 70 years, and all of a sudden this is a wonderful fruit trees. The idea is that usually you go to a nursery, and in the nursery you buy however many saplings you want. It might be different ages depending on the type of tree it is, depending on how strong of a tree it is, etc. And then you take those saplings from the nursery and you replant it. So very often it's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years old, something like that already, and you replant it. So you have to start over from scratch. So the Mishnah tells us, how's that? No achronim, nothing, just the Mishnah. It tells us that if you replant it with a clump of earth that was with it initially, so you don't have to start anew in counting. But what kind of clump of earth does it have to be? It has to be a clump of earth that the bulk of the roots are inside of it, and that it's enough k'dei chiyusa that it would be able to survive for a month or so outside of just with that soil. Now, there's a number of different shaylas. The shaylas that have to do with otzitz she'enoi nakov, otzitz nakov, that if you put it into a different type of container, and it's not. So there are all sorts of fancy shaylas that I'm not even going to get into it. But there's a very basic issue, which is theoretically it's possible, but without proper pikuach, there's no way to guarantee that there was really sufficient earth and it stayed on the whole time. You have all sorts of sloppy workers. They throw it onto the truck, throw it off the truck, all sorts of things. It crumbles, it falls off if it wasn't properly planted. And Americans have this vision where there's this burlap sackcloth around the bottom of the thing. They tie it up nicely, nothing falls off, or whatever it is. So first of all, it does have to be firm. So you'd have to be certain that it was firm, even if you would put it in such a thing. But second of all, that's when in America, when you buy from a high class nursery, that's how it comes. It doesn't always work that way here, especially when it's being done on a mass level. And it's something which really needs proper pikuach to make sure that the whole way through it's maintained properly. Because of that, without getting into all the nuances of the shilos and all the different complications and all different things, so Rabbi Yasha basically said like this: that Big Gadol, we could probably assume that it was all done in a sufficiently good manner, and that it's probably kosher. But he wasn't comfortable with calling it mahadra. So kashrut regila will have counted the count from when it was planted in the nursery, whereas in mahadra and kashruyot they usually makbid to start counting from when it was replanted in the matot, in the orchards, vineyards, etc.
They put tags on these things? Do they put tags on them with the dates?
Well, you want to know how we keep track of them?
Yeah.
How we keep track of them is that there's usually some sort of mashkiach, who very often is also some sort of botanist. It depends on the agronom, as they call them over here. It all depends on the exact situation. Some places have GPSs that we use to track them. Some places don't, some places are tagged. It all depends on how it's done. And very often like this, one of the places where it's a frequent issue is in vineyards. Vineyards, what happens is it's not big, humongous trees that you have that are strong and healthy and are going to last forever. They're thin and they're scrawny or whatever it is, and one year it's a little bit of a drought, something dies, some sort of pestilence comes and kills out some of them. So there's something they call hashlamot. Hashlamot is that they go and they fill in the breaches in the vineyard where you have a few vines that have died somewhere in the middle, so they'll fill them in. And that's really where it starts getting tricky in the vineyards, because then you say, I have to keep track. How am I going to know? And especially a lot of the vineyards, they do what's called a machine batzir, a machine harvest, where it's even harder to do. So then what we usually do is there is some sort of system for tracking, either GPS or tags or something like that. The mashkia or maps, depends on the size, depends on how much hashgacha there is on it, how involved the mashgiach is in the place. And before the harvest, the real harvest, the mashgiach goes through with a few workers, and they cut down all the stuff which is arla, or they cut off all the fruit from it at least, so that none of that fruit will be harvested when they come in with the big machines, the big mechanical harvesting machines. Then when they come in with all that type of stuff, they won't have to worry about that it's accidentally harvested together with the non-arla shilas, non-revai. And revai has to be harvested separately because you have to do chil revai on it, not because it's problematic. Eventually it can get mixed back into the wine, but the harvest, and until it's turned into wine, has to be kept somewhat separately so we can do chil revai properly. Yes?
On the suffix, Mahajim, you said they can't start counting the second time.
Right.
But that's only the suffix, they're not sure
right, so then they do chil revai twice, and both times without a bracha. So very often what they do is there's something that they are sure about is Rabbi, and they make a bracha on that, and they pipe the bracha, they pipe the bracha on everything that way. Because there are sometimes fields, the issue was when it was planted, how it was planted, that there aren't any shilas about it. So, back to Shmita. So because of this issue during Shmita, they said you can't plant fruit trees beyond the 16th of Av. Vegetables, assuming that we will allow you to harvest them in Shmita, because maybe it's only one plant and it's clear that it wasn't something that you would have planted during Shmita bis, or maybe it's planted in not such a desirable area, or an area where it wouldn't grow so well, etc. All sorts of different reasons why it would be fine, why you won't have svichen issues. So again, any type of vegetable that we're going to permit being planted before Shmita for during Shmita has to be planted by the 16th of El, because you have to have 14 days to allow it to root itself in the ground, to blossom properly, that it would be considered halachically. So again, that also goes if you're transplanting. Very often people have home gardens, they started off in little planters in the house, on a windowsill summers, one of those big sheets, and it has all sorts of little cups, and then so either you use the peat moss cups or you use just plastic things, and you scoop them out and you put them in the ground. One of those little things that you dig out, a little cup full of soil, put it in, pat it around. So in such a scenario, it's still, because you're bringing it in from inside to outside. So again, if there's a clump that all the roots are kept in, everything like that, so you don't have to start counting anew. But if not, then you would have to start counting anew if you're just pulling out the plant with just its roots or something like that. So I would say the difference is very often if it's in like a plastic sheet where you're actually taking it out of the plastic sheet, it's very likely that a lot of the soil is going to fall wayside when you're doing it. And if that's the case, so it's not worth trying to do, because you're going to end up having to throw out some of it, not having much to do with it, etc. So it's better to avoid such situations and either to make sure to do it by the 16th of Elul, or not do it at all, or if you know you're going to do it afterwards, to do it in one of those peat moss cups so that you can, or something like that, you can just plant it, you can just stick it in as is straight into the ground, so you know that the whole clump of earth is still there. Plants that you don't gain anything from during Shmita, they don't give you anything, can often be planted up if it's something which again that you're doing for fragrance. So fragrance is considered a particular hana, more so than just landscaping purposes. So that should also be planted by the 16th of Elul. Other plants really could be planted till a little bit closer, perhaps. Some opinions will say that you should always plant it beforehand, but that's already something where so if for some reason there was something that was important to plant for some reason in your garden or something like that, it's likely that it's okay.
Until when?
Until Erev Rosh Hashanah, basically. Now, but malachos of the karka are definitely permitted until Erev Rosh Hashanah. So that means plants that are seeds shouldn't be planted Erev Rosh Hashanah. But now plants that are so avodas karka, fertilizing, watering, pruning, all that type of stuff, that can be done up until Erev Rosh Hashanah, up until Rosh Hashanah, basically. So those are the malachos that are permissible to do beforehand. Now, anybody who is planting a garden or does maintain a garden, it's kedai to try to do as much as you can before Rosh Hashanah, so that you run into less problems and less shilas after Rosh Hashanah. So the wise gardener starts now, or started already.
What about flower pots outside?
Okay, so flower pots outside, there are considered to be outdoor plants. Even if you have it on your mirpeset, on a balcony, if it's not closed in, which most mirpesot aren't closed in, otherwise you don't usually refer to it as a mirpeset. Even if I did see today somebody was showing different opinions about covered area, covered mirpesot, or whatever it is. A mirpeset that's open is considered to be outdoors, because I think we talked about this in the first year, that it gets part of its unika, part of its nurturing comes through the air, and the air is outdoor air from the ground that's affected by the ground, by the soil around, etc. So it has direct impact from the outdoors, from the sun, from the earth, from everything, and therefore we view it as being yonic, as nurturing itself from the elements, and we're going to view it as an outdoor plant. Being that the case, there still might be certain differences between an atzitz nakov and an atzitz shein nakov. An atzitz nakov means a hold flower planter, whereas a flower pot, whereas an atzitz shein nakov is one that does not have any holes. And the difference is like this: that one that has holes cannot be moved around during Shmita, really, because what happens is if you move it around, it's as if you unplanted it and you're replanting it during Shmita. If it doesn't have holes, so it's true that it's outside, but I didn't really change anything by moving it around a little bit. So that's the gain that you get by when it doesn't have a hole. Again, if it's mamish small holes, or if the holes are on the side just to let out a little bit of water, that's going to be okay. It's when you have holes on the bottom, and when it's more than like a, this machlokes is about exact opinions. It's more if the roots can go through. If you're going to get real roots that go through the holes, or if you have a series of holes, so you're going to end up with roots going through a few holes, even if they're relatively small. Then, so that's when it's going to be a problem.
Even if there's a plate underneath?
If there's a plate underneath, so that you made it into an atzitz shein nakov, because it doesn't have a hole in the bottom anymore. So it's like having a hole on the side. Hole on the side's okay, but the branches of the plant can't be hanging over the ground directly either. So either you need some sort of plate or tray underneath it, or if the flower pot is big enough that it encompasses also the spread of the branches, that's going to be okay.
Excuse me? So, the plates, you're saying the benefit, right? You can have a potted plant. I'm curious, like you were saying earlier, something about the air. What's the kesher? Is it the ground, or are you saying that the ground is touching the air?
There's a few aspects that might be involved here, which I'll explain soon. We didn't talk much about matzah menutak, so I don't remember if we did talk. Maybe we did talk a lot about it. I don't remember. I'm going to get to greenhouses at some point, and then we'll explain some of the shayas a little bit better then. Hopefully.
But there is something you're saying as a kesher between the air and the ground and nurturing or something? Because right. What you're talking about now, but the plate is strictly the roots, right? The roots we don't want the roots to touch the ground.
Right.
That's a kesher, a mechanical connection versus you're up on your past 3 stories in the sky, and that's what I'm like.
3 stories in the sky, I'm going to differ there for a moment, which is as follows. So we have a klal, a halachic klal, so to speak, which is that mechober lekarka is like karka. Now, it's not necessarily always evoked.
What does that mean?
That something which is attached to the ground, in a more permanent way, is considered to be part of the ground. Okay? Now, it's not always, we don't always use this concept, and there's all sorts of different tricks in both directions. What makes it be considered connected to the ground, what makes it not be connected to the ground. For Inyanik Toma and Tahara, for things of purity and impurity, so also something which is connected to the ground isn't Mekabel Toma. But that's because it's not considered to be a utensil. It's mevatel, it nullifies its ownness, so to speak, because it's never moved. So over there, we have a klal, something which is machzik, something which can hold 40 saw, to a certain type of measurement. That's the size of a mikvah, actually, the halachic size of a mikvah. So something that can hold that volume, and it's made to hold that volume. Regularly, so we say it's not made to be carried, because that's a hefty volume. Think about a mikvah, the size of a small mikvah, not a big mikvah, but a small mikvah. That's a hefty volume, and it's not something that you pick up regularly. Now, we actually sometimes, I've had a machlokes one time with the kashrus organization just to prove to me that as frum as they were trying to be, they're not really so frum because they don't really know halacha. And it was in one of our wineries, they had very big vats and they wanted to table them. And I didn't see why they had to table them. I said that it's machzik more than our bottom saw, it holds more than 40 saw. It's considered mechober lekarka, it's not considered a kli, it's mekabel toma. And the reason why we toivel a kli is because it was used by a guy. It has some sort of toma to it, not toma as in tomas mace or something like that. Not the toma that we contract from a dead body or something like that. But it's a different type of, it's a similar type of concept. And because of that, we toivel in the mikvah to purify it from its toma. So, didn't see why it needs to be toivel, because it's machzik arba'im saw. That's what it's meant to do. It's like a steel silo of a sort. And so it's very nice that you want to be firmer than the Pope. I also want to be firmer than the Pope. But it's very nice that that you want to be firmer than the Torah. But I'm happy if we're as firm as the Torah. So that's that was the. So we have questions at some point in time. By Shmita, we wouldn't consider something which is, most opinions wouldn't consider something which is machzik arba'im saw, that's something that holds 40 saws to be considered mechob mekarka. But other things, it becomes a real question halachically if it is considered mechob mekarka. There are opinions that are mekel, because they say by Shmita, since what we're really looking for is yinika, is something which derives direct nurturing from the soil. So, come on, give me a break. You have somebody on the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 10th, 15th story. So that you're going to tell me that's being yainik, that's nurturing itself from the ground. Right? It's kind of far-fetched. Whereas there's other opinions that say,
how do they get
the
weeds?
reason is really because if it's growing in the ground, it's nurturing from the ground. But halachically, we consider this to be attached to the ground, and since we consider, and it is attached to the ground, and since it is attached to the ground, so halachically, it's as if it's growing from the ground, even though it's not really going to get great nutrients from the tiles on the 5th floor.
Except that the weeds still grow there.
Right?
The weeds still.
So anyway, but because of all these concepts on an open merpesa, I do think that it's kedai to be a little bit more careful, especially because when it comes to food shilas, you need food to eat. It's one thing, but when it comes to things that are done either for hobbies or done for landscaping purposes and that, those are the areas where I think it's easy for us to be a little bit more stringent and to give to Shmita, to show HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we want to keep Shmita when we can.
So pretend like there's a kesher to the ground, is what you're saying.
I'm saying pretend. There is some sort of thing. Things do nurture from the air, and there are things that need certain types of air to grow. It's not just the soil per se.
Don't move it. That's the whole.
Moving it is that's enough to mean if it's outside. If it's outside, to move inside is a whole different shayla, which there are opinions that if it's an otzit she'enu nakov, if it's a flower pot that doesn't have a hole, that you can move it inside during Shmita, that you can start taking care of it in the middle of Shmita. It's not accepted by all opinions like that, so there isn't any dire reason to do that. I would suggest not doing it. So, moving a little bit further on to what you can do in Shmita, assuming that a plant is planted outdoors and is being gainik from Karka, Eretz Yisrael, etc. What are you allowed to do and what are you not allowed to do? I have my garden, I have my grass. Let's talk about my lawn. This is Beit Shemesh. Some people do have lawns in Beit Shemesh. So let's talk about a lawn. I have a lawn. It's outside, hands down. It's growing on the ground. And what am I allowed to do on it? Lawns need to be mowed, lawns need to be watered. Maybe I usually fertilize my lawn midday palm. What am I allowed to do? What am I not allowed to do? So the halacha is as follows. When it comes to a fruit tree, or something that's giving me food, something which is giving me something that I can eat, sustenance from it, so I'm allowed to do anything to keep the sustenance alive. Now, when it comes to other plants, if it's going to damage an investment, in other words, I have a lawn, it's invested, it's something nice, it's something that I needed to keep the mud away otherwise I'm going to have a mud pile in the front yard. I'm going to have more insects perhaps and different things like that. It's not, it's going to become weedy and overgrown and basically a useless piece of ground if I don't maintain my lawn. So such a lawn then can be maintained. What does that mean to maintain? Though I can't do it in order that the lawn should get prettier and prettier and prettier during the course of the year, and I can't do it in a way that just to make it as pretty as I possibly can right now. So usually what's suggested is like this: to water it less often, just to water it sufficiently that it won't die. Not that it should get a stronger root base and should start growing thicker and thicker and lusher, but that the grass that I have right now, I'm not going to lose that grass. It's not going to start getting overtaken by weeds. It's not going to start dying and getting all dried out. I'm going to have to replant it all after Shmita. So that kind of watering I can do. So usually if I water it, let's say, twice a week, so I should water it once every other week or something like that, which is going to be sufficient to keep it alive. It's not going to flourish and be lush and as beautiful as it is in other years. Same thing goes for mowing it. Now when I do water it, there's no limit then to how much I can water it. I can go and I can water it gesund. I can go and I can put a lot more water on it. When I do, I can flood it, so to speak, so that it shall last longer till the next time that I water it. Because now, once I'm watering, it's not really doing anything. I'm not doing anything additional. The same mowing is a similar type of idea. That I shouldn't mow it for the purposes of keeping it at that perfect height. So if I'm one of those pedantic types of people that mows my lawn every week, so it should be just the perfect height. I'm not getting into how healthy it is or whatever it is. And I rotate the directions, etc., all the different lawn mowing techniques. So when it comes to Shmita, I shouldn't do it as frequently. I can do it, when I do it once a month instead of doing it once a week, I can mow it much shorter so that it shall last longer. It might get into that's the optimum health for it or whatever it is. Or I can allow it to grow a little bit longer so that it shouldn't be, if that doesn't bother me. You definitely can mow it if it starts getting to a point where you're worried about either insects or it becomes, your kids can't really play there because it's too long, it's hard for them to run it, etc., that type of stuff. It definitely can be mowed at that point. Hands down, no shilas. Now another question, what about watering it with a timer? So I can't set a timer during Shmita because it's the same thing as watering it right now. But what about if I set the timer before Shmita? It works for Shabbos, why doesn't it work for Shmita? Now for Shabbos, actually, I'm of the opinion that people should not water their lawns with a sprinkler that's on a timer on Shabbos. Even though nowadays it's already very mekubal.
It's Marzani.
Marasayan was the original problem. Nowadays that a lot of people have such systems and so it's less Marasayan. First of all, you get into all sorts of other shilas if it's watering it on Shabbos. Second of all, maybe there's a little bit of Marasayan still involved. Third of all, Ramesh has a tshuva where he comes out against Shabbos clocks, except for lights. He comes out, it's a Zilzul Shabbos. It starts to come out, there's no real difference. So I think that's probably the same thing on a regular Shabbos. So on a regular Shabbos, even though I don't know how niskabel Ramesh's tshuva is, most people use timers for pretty much everything around their house. I think this is one area where again it's kedai to be machmer and not use your timer for. When it comes to, but a timer that's used also for watering the lawn, it has to be a real watering system because if you have a sprinkler, so I remember like in America, they sell in Home Depot a timer that you can put on your faucet. So you can use the cheap, Picket, sprinklers or just the ones that you put on the ground that rotate and whatever it is and that type of thing. So you can put it onto between the hose and the faucet, and it works like a timer. But that type of thing, most people see one of those types of things. They don't think of it. Oh, you probably have a timer on it. It looks like it doesn't look like a system. It looks like something you just stuck in now during the hot season, the more drought-like season or whatever it is. So you want to water your lawn. You're not one of these people who really waters things regularly. So you did it now, and that's a much bigger issue on our side. So during Shmita, if I have a watering system in place, can I set a timer before Shmita? So setting a time before Shmita, there are those that assert. I would tend to think that it's mutter to do it beforehand. Although it might be better still to, a little bit of a shinoi or something like that, to do it a little bit less frequently, but I do think it's okay to use a timer beforehand. The only problem is that you can't really adjust it during Shmita to change it, because the second you adjust it, it's as if you set the timer during Shmita and you lose all of that. So I wouldn't adjust it. even with the shinui, I wouldn't adjust it because over here the malachos are viewed differently. Because when Chazal made the takanas of all the rabbanon malachos, which watering is one of the rabbinic malachos, they did it in a way that they didn't want the malacha to be accomplished, so to speak. So even doing it with so if I move it with a shinui, the tachlis, the watering is getting done without a shinui. It's not like it's over here. It's not the timer. That's really the malacha. The malacha is the watering, and the watering ends up being done without a shinui. I don't think it's so good, even though there are mekilim on Shabbos clocks. Sometimes we have to turn it off to make it go on later or something like that. You can move the pegs of the shinui. Zalman has a term for such things. I think Ramesha talks about such things. Doing a kalach yad with the back of your hand, or taking a little toy or something to do with. So even those opinions, I don't know that they would be makel on Shmita if you set a smart watering system before Shmita.
Even if it's every 2 weeks, like Chris said.
No, if you're doing it every 2 weeks, so if there's a real shinui in it already, then I would say it's fine because it's not worse than watering with a shinui, which we said was mutter. It's not worse than watering less frequently anyway, because watering that's not so much a shinui. That's watering less frequently, so that I'm showing that I'm only doing it to keep it alive, and I'm not doing it for the purpose of.
So the problem is setting the same time, or to let it go off the way it's normally going off every year, not Shemitah years.
So that was the shah that I talked about, which I think it's mutter. I said it beforehand. I think it's mutter.
Even twice a week.
Yeah, to set it regularly. L'maisa, like I mentioned before, it's always an area which is easier to be machmer on. Someone who wants to be makabel chumras and Shmita to show that they really want to keep it and that type of thing. So it's always a good area to choose. And in all areas of halacha, a person has to know where it's kedai to be machmer, where it's not kedai. Not because we're we're tricking a Kodesh Baruch, so to speak, like we're being from where it's easier, we're not being from where it's difficult. But where it's difficult, sometimes there are real other reasons when it comes to food and things like that. So a person has a family, they have to take care of them, they have to feed their family, and all that type of stuff. So it's an area where you might choose to be a little bit more maker when it comes to gardening, where it doesn't really have an impact on anybody. So there's no other real cheshbainis to take into account here. So it might as well be as machmer as you can.
So fertilizers, pesticides, weed control.
So fertilizers can't really be used because it's very rare that without a fertilizer it's actually going to die. If something's going to die without fertilizing it, so double check with the rabbi beforehand, but then it might be okay. Pesticides are sometimes a little bit more frequent, where either it's going to die because it's being attacked by some sort of pestilence, or because if let's say a fruit tree or something like that, the fruit are going to become totally inedible if it's if you don't use pesticides. In such situations, you can use pesticides, but again, it is best to do it with a shinui, in a way that's a little bit different than the way it would usually be done during a regular year.
A regular lawn, not a fruit tree.
What?
A regular lawn.
Pesticides for regular lawn? I wouldn't put pesticides in the lawn. I don't want my kids to play.
Weed
But
killer.
Not Roundup.
Weed
The
killers.
thing around, you want to kill the weeds that are coming up the synthetic grass, right? That's
Okay,
what-
so weeding you can't really do during Shmita unless it's mamish killing your grass. If it's
to kill it.
No, it's in the
no,
grass.
if the weeds are really killing the grass,
And if the weeds are killing
Right.
the grass, then you can kill the weeds.
right? Because that everybody knows when you weed the weeds, you're doing so in order to enhance the grass. The grass should be prettier. But it's usually not so much that you have a fear that the weeds are really going to take over the grass. Again, it depends on the kind of weed. It depends on the kind of grass. But usually it's not because you're worried that it's going to kill the grass and you lost your whole hashkah. Usually it's because it's not so pretty to have to have a dandelion growing in the middle of your lawn, or to have clovers or something like that growing in the middle of your lawn, unless you're Irish. Anyway.
Like you said before, though, if the weeds get to the point that it's hard to walk and it's a nuisance.
Yeah, but then you're cutting it. It's not weeding it out. It's different between weeding is a little bit more like pruning. It's more of a malacha. Whereas cutting is so I cut the little lawn. I cut the weeds also. So yeah, the weeds often grow taller quicker than the rest of the
You
grass.
just pull the weeds sloppy, like you don't really get the roots. That's called cutting, or that's called weeding.
If it's clear that you're not really rooting it or whatever it is, so then it's just for beauty. I think it's still a problem.
So the man said, just go back to this case of the synthetic grass now. Occasionally between synthetic grass, mamish and the seam or whatever, you start getting some. You want the grass to be dead. grass will be dead anyway, that's why you put it down on top of it. Occasionally some grass grows through or weed grows through. In that situation, Mamishon,
I'd say you can cut it when it starts getting unruly, but to actually, if there's going to be a real loss, if you start getting like a real clump and it's starting to rot away the synthetic grass, like it's starting to,
it's has a moment.
right. So if it's azic moment, so then you should ask a rabbi at that point to make sure it's really, that it's, it really looks like azic moment, but then it might be okay. Otherwise, so you maybe can cut it if it starts getting unruly that you have such things on the edge. But but only cut it when it really gets unruly.
What about spraying wheat, not cutting, but spraying wheat killer? Is that the same way?
Yeah. What about pruning? Not for the sake of pruning that it should grow thicker and nicer, and not so that you have a beautiful shape, not because I want it to have all sorts of animal shapes or just that very flat American hedge look or whatever it is. Not for that, for those types of purposes. But I have a path. I need to get to my house. On each side of the path, I have shrubs. And at some point in time, it starts getting unruly, and the path gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And maybe I can make my way through, but it's not always so nice for all the guests and that type of stuff. So, can I cut down the branches in such a situation? The answer is as follows. It's best to see if you can just, if you can tie them back a little bit. But if that becomes not really feasible and not really practical, so then yes, you can cut them down. But you shouldn't take, one of these electric hedge trimmers and go through and make a perfect line. You should cut out the branches that are sticking too far out, and it's best to do with as much of a shinui as possible. That's another frequently asked shaila. The fertilizing, what about putting slow release fertilizing before Rosh Hashanah, things like that? Also, so the truth of the matter is, so the shaila is like this. If it's something where I put it down now, and it's not something that it's not one of these types of things where it's done every 3 months or whatever it is, so I'm doing it now for 3 months. In that type of situation where I'm doing it now for 3 months, it's definitely problematic. Because it's clear that what I'm doing now is a malacha that's supposed to last into the Shmita. If I'm putting something down now, which is slow release, it means that somehow it lasts longer. I don't really know exactly how it lasts longer, and I don't know how many times a year to do it. It's not something you do 3 times a year, that it lasts quarterly or something like that. So then you could do it before, then you probably could, and there's nothing that you see now in the slow release. It's not like there's some sort of container in the ground that's releasing it slowly or something like that. It's just something or it's not a pill, some sort of pellet that's lying on the grass that you see centigrating. So then then it should be okay to do if it's not that type of thing.
If you use a weed killer before Rosh Hashanah and the weed dies, can you then pull it out after?
Okay, so if it's dead, you can't pull it out just because it's dead. If it's killing other things because it's dead.
Or if it's unsightly? No?
Again, it's not supposed to be for the point of beauty during Shmita.
Right.
So just because it's unsightly isn't really such a good reason. If it's because if it's because it's killing other stuff and it's going to be a hastin moment, it's going to be a lot of financial loss, monetary loss. Then it's okay. Another shaila that comes up frequently is, what about flowers? Buying away flowers for Shabbos, anniversary, birthday, whatever it is, some sort of occasion. Say I'm sorry. What about buying flowers? So the truth of the matter is that yes, flowers grow in a garden, and if it was done b'isser, it might have a din of svichim even, especially if there's flowers that are scented, and therefore it is important to buy flowers from a place that has hashgacha, that it was done in accordance to Shmita. Now, just to bring home a certain point, if I planted something b'isser, either a fruit tree too close to Rosh Hashanah, or I planted it after Rosh Hashanah or something like that, the halacha is that I have to uproot it. It has to be deracinated.
On Shmita.
During Shmita, I have to uproot it. I can't be nana from it, and even if it was done purely by accident. because that's exer from Chazal to ensure that people shouldn't do it purposely. They don't want us to be nana from it whatsoever. It has to be the rest of it. Now, if somebody bought you flowers though, and they brought it to your house, so that because there's a lot of shilas involved, so you're allowed to put it into water. I mean, you're not planting it that way. If somebody buys you a plant during Shmita that might have been planted during Shmita, might have been planted during Shmita, if it's already a very well-grown plant and it's an otzitcheinu nakov, and it was brought to you in some sort of nylon, some sort of nice fancy packaging, so it was closed up and that type of thing. So then you can keep it. If not, maybe you don't want to insult the person, so you don't have to throw it out right away in front of their face. You don't have to, be a real kid, take it and say, keep the dirty flowers and throw it out. But it should be uprooted. It shouldn't be something that you're bad to nana from afterwards, and so then you should throw it out. Or if somebody buys cut flowers, so then you could put it into a vase of water, even though you don't know where the source is. However, in the first place, it's best to buy from a place that is certified that some of the flowers might be imported, some of the flowers might be, might have grown in greenhouses in ways that are mutter. Now, really, I think the Shiur is supposed to come to close. Since I came late, I'll go just a few minutes over to discuss again Matzah Menutak. I think we discussed it before, but just for brevity's sake, to say it in short, the idea is to replicate growing in your own house. But again, in your own house, it needs to be in an otzitcheinu nakov. Especially in a greenhouse, it's even more so. Why? Because a greenhouse doesn't usually have a proper floor. It has the ground as a floor. So in order that it shouldn't be growing from the ground, it does have to be in an otzitcheinu nakov. Usually what they do is they take these big PVC sheets, they roll it out to the full length of the greenhouse, they clip up the edges of it, and they turn it into like a tub, into a PVC tub, and in there they plant inside of it. Now there are people that maintain that this doesn't work. The real reason why they maintain it doesn't work is because they say it's always planted like that. Why is it always planted like that? It's true. Now, everybody knows the greenhouse effect. Probably at some point when you're in kindergarten or something like that, you made a project where you took a soda bottle and you cut off the top and you planted inside of it, and then you took a piece of saran wrap, you watered it, and then you put a piece of saran wrap on top of the rubber band, and you didn't water it ever again, or not for a very long time, and you let the seeds that you plant and they grow very quickly, very nicely. And why is that? Because the moisture evaporates. It's see-through also, so that it gets even hotter inside, and the moisture evaporates from the soil, but it goes back up, forms condensation, and the moisture stays in there, so you don't really have to continue to water it. And it's a very nice, moist environment for a seed or a sapling or something like that to grow in. So a greenhouse, that's called the greenhouse effect. Now, if you want to enhance the greenhouse effect even more, so if I just plant in the soil on the bottom of the greenhouse, so it's true that a lot of that in the air, I won't lose what evaporates because it will form condensation and keep it moist. But what goes into the ground will dissipate in the soil, and I'm going to lose that moisture. So in order to avoid that and really get the maximum effect, what I do is I put it into a tub so the water stays in the soil, and whatever evaporates into the air stays because it's contained. So theoretically, the best way of doing it is to have the whole floor covered. So some of the greenhouses do, but for the whole floor, it's hard to cover with PVC or a tile or whatever. They're huge. These places are mamish huge. They put charedi chasim halls to shame. They're huge. So what they do when they want to do is they put down tarp. Now tarp might be considered totally sealed off from the ground. The problem with tarp is it's a woven. Tarp was actually created as a marine fabric. It was used for all sorts of sailing purposes. The problem, so water can't get through it. It's watertight. The problem with tarp is since it's woven, though, if you put it down on the floor and you start walking back and forth on it, anybody who had a tarp sukkah back in the States at some point in time knows that at some point it starts fraying. So that's the problem with the tarp, is that when it's on the floor of a greenhouse and it's being treaded upon and things that people are going over it, and there's tools, harvesting tools, and all sorts of things that are dropping out and going on and planting and bending and walking and all sorts of different things, it's bound to rip, and once it's ripped, it has holes, and those holes go directly to the ground, and it all becomes one connected piece. So even though for the greenhouse effect, it's more or less sufficient, for a Shmita effect, it's not sufficient. But the tubs, if the plants are all contained within the tubs, including the foliage, so that's going to be sufficient for Shmita sake, according to most opinions. According to other opinions, because that's how you always grow, you do it like being grown in the ground. But that's few and far between. Most of the poskim maintain that Matzah Menutak does work. Any other questions? Just going to take this question first.
Can I use the lemons off my lemon tree?
You can use the lemons off your lemon tree, but you have to be mafkir in your garden. So that means that you have to allow me to come pick the lemons off your, or anybody here, not per se me, because if you allow just one person, that wouldn't be hefker. Hefker means you allow anybody to do it. Now let's say you don't want people trampling, I don't know what kind of yard you have, but let's say you have a gated yard and your kids play outside, you don't really want strangers coming in, things like that. So then what you have to do is, I think we have discussed this before, but then what you have to do is you put a sign on the gate to your garden with a phone number, and you say anybody who, in this yard there's a lemon tree, anybody who would like to come pick lemons is welcome to, please coordinate with us, and you put down your home number or your cell phone number, your husband's cell phone number, something like that, and that way you gave them the option to be able to come in. Alternatively, you can put up an hour. You can say, that you don't really care, people are traipsing around there when you're not home in the morning and you're at work, or vice versa. When you're at home, at work, you don't really want to leave it open because you're worried that from there the chalil, somebody will come into your house. So, but when you're home in the afternoon or whatever it is, or when your husband's home in the evening, you don't really care if somebody comes in to pick. So you can put up there's a lemon tree here between the hours of 3 to 5 or whatever it is. Please feel free to come pick lemons. Now, when you take the lemons off, you can't take off all the lemons from your tree and put it in a nice big basket by your entrance or in your kitchen or something like that. What you have to do is you pick the amount of lemons you would use in the course of a week. Then it's also, you don't have to take off trumas and maisus like you do in regular years.
You don't have
No, because it's hefker. It doesn't really belong to you.
And you said something about citrus trees. Is that true for pomegranate?
Because citrus trees has a slightly different year later on. No, pomegranates are regular fruit trees. They're regular fruit.
So the same rules apply? Put aside
Yeah. No, to all trees that applies. To citrus trees and to regular trees, that rule applies. The shayla is when it becomes negea. Your citrus fruit that grow now, that grow at the beginning of Shmita, are likely not going to have a problem. It's the fruit, the ones that grow the year afterwards. But you should check with the rabbi exactly about the type of tree that you have always to make sure that it's because it's a shayla basar chanat or basar lakita. If we view Shmita as when it's, or the years as when it's being picked or when it grows. Actually, I should really say like this. This year it's going to be Kedusha Shvius, and it could very well be the next year also on citrus fruit. It has like a 2-year thing, at least l'chol.
Well, I noticed when I was harvesting my lemons early in the year, picking off the ripe lemons, there was still an awful lot of very small green ones growing. So at one point, do they become...
Right, so that we say, because it's like we say by Esrik, that it's Hadar B'Ilonim Mishal L'Shama, that it can stay on the tree for a long time. It's not like other ones that it's one specific season. They can hang on from one season sometimes to the next season. But anything picked during Shmita has Kedusha Shvius, and if it grew during Shmita, and with something that we view as going Basar Chanata, so then it also has Kedusha Shvius even in the 8th year. So definitely something that did the majority of its growing the year before is going to be viewed still as Kedusha Shvius the next year. I think you had a question, just want to take it first.
Just want to balance the flowers and Kedusha Shvius. How do you treat the flowers? Do they have to develop Kedusha Shvius?
When they're starting to wilt and look around, and you usually throw them out, the water starts smelling and that type of stuff, you throw it out. Usually, since you throw it out in the usual, regularly, at that point in time, there's no problem throwing it out.
Doesn't have to be in Pachshvius.
What?
Doesn't have to be in Pachshvius then.
No, because that's already at a point in time where it's already lost its status. Nobody wants a shriveled up flower that's making smelly water and whatever it is That's always one of the famous Shalom Bayis shilas, right? Should you buy flowers for Shabbos, but then you have to remember to take it out, then you have to remember to throw it out by Wednesday or whatever it is. It depends on the flower shop, depends on the season, but that's always the famous flower chakir. Buy flowers. Yes.
I have 2 questions. Last week you mentioned in terms of fruit being used in the regular way, so you said
Right.
peaches. Canned peaches are cooked, right? They're cooked as they're canned?
Okay, anything that's canned, the canned peaches aren't mamish cooked. You know, they're left someone, they're cooked enough that they shouldn't be, they shouldn't get like spoiled while they're in the can.
Heat pasteurized, it's a flash pasteurized,
Flash
something.
pasteurized.
Yeah, they do something.
It's a flash pasteurization in the can. It's usually once it's in the can already. But I don't think anybody does it with peaches that are kedusha shvius.
Okay.
Not that I know of.
So that was my next question. I know canned goods and dried fruit, we have to watch out for the next 2 years after Shmita.
That's more for heter mechira. I don't think you're gonna have any. I don't think you have anybody that actually does it as. So again, heter mechira would be shamar v'nevar, and once it was done, it's motatir, because we mentioned once it's cooked, you're allowed to have it. So those peaches, let's say you bought a can of canned peaches after Shmita, so you can serve it or eat it as canned peaches. I wouldn't cook with it, but you can eat it at that point once you already have it.
They treat it with fish.
You treat it with kedusha shvius.
Okay, but are there any other things besides your canned? You said even like carrots, they store for months on end. So what about the 8th year?
The 8th year, if the 8th year in all your produce, you should still be careful. And you'll see in a lot of stores, they won't get into it. In a lot of stores that go during Shmita from being mahadran to being kashrut regilah because they use heter mechira, you'll see that they won't get their mahadran status back so quickly. It takes them a while till most of the shilas are already void. But it is kedai always to keep an eye. Even now, people buy grape juice and wine and things like that. They're very often still are buying things that are kedusha shvius and things like that. So it's always kedai to double check. I always tell everybody. And you know what? In Israel, because everything's kosher on some level, and because it's all the same companies that make the kosher and that make the mahadran and the non-mahadran products. Sometimes there's very little difference between the packaging, and sometimes even accidentally in a supermarket, it's quote unquote a mahadran supermarket. They sometimes end up with kashrut regilah products. It's very frequent with the ma'adanim, with the yogurts and puddings and that type of stuff. That sometimes there's very little difference. There usually is some sort of difference, but sometimes it's a very minute difference. And it's important to pay attention to hashgachos all the time. The consumer really has to, the OU tries to be very careful that there should be a significant difference in packaging between different levels of kashrus and definitely between things that aren't kosher and things that are kosher. But not everybody's as careful, and it happens to the frummest of people and to the best of people, and they make mistakes buying the same cheese that they thought was mahadran. It's not mahadran. With mahadran cheeses, I definitely recommend being makbid because the non-mahadran cheeses can use non-kosher cultures and non-kosher enzymes and things like that, which it's a real shiloh. Again, there's somebody that's matir, and whatever it is, but it's a much schwacher heterim, so to speak, and it's very kedai in background. So those types of things, it's always kedai to double check hashgachos and anything about it.
Is a dehydrator the same as cooking?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If something's usually eaten in a dried out format, it's the most common way of eating it, so that'll probably be permissible. But you have to convince me that something that's the way that it's most commonly eaten, that it's most commonly not eaten fresh. Again, if it's something which is mechzal, so there are opinions that are made on it.
If you pick a lemon or another fruit tree early in the Shmita year, it could be chayv trimas and maestros, right? Because it's
there might be a shiloh. There might be a shiloh there, right? So it's always, if you have anything which is a shiloh about that, so double check always the rabbi.
Shmita, did you touch on there needs to be 2 Shmita pachs?
Yeah, we discussed that in previous shiur. I'm happy to mention it again. That because you don't want to spoil the perfectly fine Shmita produce, and you might have in the first peak the Shmita pach, you might have things that are a shiloh if it's spoiled or not spoiled yet, so you didn't throw it out yet. So you shouldn't put in fresh stuff because maybe you might actually be spoiling.
So you move your Shmita produce to the next pach at some point.
No, I wouldn't suggest moving it. I suggest using bags in your Shmita pach for a few reasons. First of all, I don't know anybody who wants to start scraping out rotten fruit from the Shmita pach.
And I'm just trying to say that's the new peels that.
No, so let's say I have 2 or 3. I have them I'm not merpasset. I have 2 or 3. Now again, there's shilas that I'm putting in the sun. I think those shilas are all a little bit far out. You can put it if that's where your Shmita pach happens to be. I think it's fine to put it in the sun. But if I have 3 pachs over here on my merpasset, I imagine that's a Shmita pach, and next to it there's another 2 of them. So over here I have a bag inside here, and today I put all my stuff in here. Now tomorrow, or maybe the next day, whatever it is, or maybe a week from now, I don't know how quickly it starts to spoil, if it's winter, if it's summer, whatever it is. But over here I have another pach, which is empty right now. I come back in a day or two and I want to put things in and it smells already a little spoiled. Don't put it in there, put it into the next one. Let this continue to stay there. As always, to start moving and playing games. Leave it there, it's in a bag. When the stuff that's in here is fully spoiled, and even though some of it might spoil quicker than others because I put in all sorts of different peels that together and some of them are quicker to spoil than others, it's fine, it's already there. I'm not causing it to spoil more quickly now. In 2 weeks' time or whatever it is that it's fully spoiled, I take out the bag, tie it up, and throw it out.
What's fully spoiled?
Fully spoiled means there's really nothing that can be done with it, and anybody would always throw out such things. There's really nothing that can be done with it. But wait always a little bit extra. Again, it's always kedai in these types of things. Kedusha shvi, it's something special, it's something that we're supposed to have. Leave it a little longer, make sure it's spoiled, and throw it out. If you're not sure, you can tie up the bag already when it's in there because if it's starting to smell a little bit, it's not so pleasant. Certain types of peels will smell more quickly. Banana peels smell very quickly. It all depends on how potent of a smell it has in the first place.
It always could be used for mulch, though.
Yeah, no, but that's not a Shmita purpose.
What happens if you like make vegetable soup? And what happens to the stock? You know, the ashes,
What, you're talking the broth?
the broth.
The broth has kedusha shviyas. So assuming you have vegetables that have kedusha shviyas, however you got to that, because it's not so simple, because it's most likely svichin. But assuming you have such broth, assuming that somehow you do have it and you have such broth, or you put in something which is considered to be a fruit or whatever it is, so that broth would have a din of kedusha shviyas. But the pot doesn't become kedusha shviyas. And if I cook something else in the pot afterwards, it's not kedusha shviyas.
How many stories above ground is considered miltah?
So again, either one story would be sufficient or no difference. I'm of the opinion that it really doesn't make a difference. You can live in a skyscraper and it would still be not considered a mitak.
You're not.
That's my opinion. My personal opinion is that
You're not attached.
as of now. Maybe somebody will persuade me to change my mind.
Not considered miltah, you mean it's out of the ground?
Yeah,
Doesn't matter how high up you go.
doesn't matter how high up.
So if somebody has a pot plant, what should we put a piece of metal underneath? Or?
If it's in the house or if it's outside the house. If it's on your merpeset, there's nothing to do about it. If it's in your house, so put a tray underneath it.
For what?
A tray or something underneath it.
What material?
Plastic, metal, glass.
What size is the hole for it to be considered?
So they say basically the size of a shekel or something like that, but on my side I think I would be a little bit more accurate. Because see, the roots do go through smaller holes than that. If you can stick your pinky into it or whatever, it's there.
Is it all the pot plants today?
Most potted plants, I would say put a tray
Pots are a
underneath.
problem. Is it all
Yes, I would say but most of them you can put a tray underneath. And the tray has to be big enough that the foliage doesn't extend beyond the tray.
So if you just have the normal, I don't know.
If you have that little thing that's the exact size of the pot, and the plant is like a tree that has branches that already extend over the edge of it, so that's not going to be sufficient. So then you find some sort of bigger tray now, so you put an aluminum pan or something like that, even then you just put it underneath. Or even a piece of aluminum foil, make a nice aluminum foil tray, so to speak.
So time with a lot of foliage, it has to be the size of the foliage.
Mm-hmm. So you could take like a glass plato or something like that, like a glass tile or
And
something.
we have this huge plant,
So that's why I would recommend putting something big underneath it. If there's holes in it, or if there's no, still because of the foliage, I would recommend putting something underneath it. But our opinions that are more medical, our opinions, like I said before, to find somebody more machmir, you'll always find somebody more machmir. To find somebody more medical nowadays, you'll also always find somebody more medical. Any other
In that
questions?
case, then what can you do with your plants? You got your plants on your merpeset, 3 flights up. They all got plates underneath.
On the merpeset, I don't know if the plates help. If it's indoors, the plate would help.
Oh.
So on the merpeset, I don't know that there's much to do. I would treat it like a Shmita garden, then like as if it was on the ground, and water just less frequently and that type of stuff. Take a little bit less care of it. Let it be a little bit more natural. Go natural. It's in vogue.
If it doesn't have fruit on it, so it's not such a problem in any case.
If it has
Unless
fruit,
you
you're allowed to
get
take
it
enough care of it that the fruit should be bountiful and plentiful and that type of thing.
We have mint. I'm on the 3rd floor. We have potted little garden. Weed starts coming in, or like the mint starts going into the flowers.
Okay.
And starts growing and
mint
like.
is a shiloh of svichin. If you once the original cutting is probably fine. Once you cut it afterwards, it might be a shiloh. If it's just a little bit and it's clear that you're doing it only for your house, or the only.
This is not my question. My question is attacking the plant next door, either a weed or the mint goes into another. I got flowers, and I started pulling. I was like, with the long root, I was pulling these mint and weed starters that came into the potted plant. Do you just let them? They probably in a year they'll kill the flowers that are.
So again, if it's going to kill your other flowers, so then you wouldn't be allowed to.
So even now, my question is it little stubby ones? You have to wait till they're big and rooted.
If it's at a point where it's starting to become a threat, you can weed it. It's best to weed it in a little bit of in a slightly different manner. You weed backwards, something like that. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.